Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Aparutade sangamatassa tawara Sodavanta Bamunjantu Satan. So we're all gathered here this afternoon. As many members of the Sangha is living human beings. So we count how many people are here, and we can say we see them always as individuals. Monks or nuns or anagarikas, lay people. We have different names we give to these various forms. When we take refuge in Sangha, what does that really mean practically? In terms of a real refuge, you take refuge in bhikkhus or in a collection of people or Theravada Buddhist Sangha. Sangha is a word generally used for a group of people, many people together. So I remember in the early years there were arguments about what Sangha really meant. There was a kind of hard line that said it just means Bhikkhu Sangha, and others, are lay people, lay teachers say they're in a Sangha. Is that the real Sangha? And then we form opinions about what is traditional, what is right, what is, our particular interpretation of the word. But when we take refuge in Sangha, Sanghang Saranang Gacchami, are we taking refuge in the forms of tradition or a particular group of monks or group of nuns? Is it just, is that what we mean? Or is Sangha a much more profound term for one who practices, supatipanno, one who practices well? And this is up to all of us, whatever our position is in the tradition. So the encouragement is to, we have symbols, we have Buddha Rupas. Do we take refuge in Buddha Rupas or Dhamma? In Thailand, for example, in Wat Pa Pong, I remember they had a very nice ornate bookcase in the sala with a collection of the Tripitaka, and that's the Dhamma. Then the bhikkhus sitting on the platform or the Sangha. These are external symbols only. And what is the value of symbols? How do we relate to the symbols we find ourselves inheriting in this tradition? So symbols are like Buddha Rupas or icons or statues, golden images. They can be very beautiful or very ugly. They aren't always beautiful to look at. They can be. But whatever they look like, whether they're big or small, whatever mudra they represent, they're a symbol for awakenness here and now, mindfulness here and now. So that's what we take refuge in. So it's not like idol worship or believing there's some magic powers in the Buddha Rupas here. That's superstition. We can project all kinds of powerful images onto the Buddha Rupa here, the Prapatan in the temple. Some Buddha Rupas, what they can do is inspire. Some are very inspiring. Others, I was visiting in India, in Assam, years ago on a tea plantation, and then they took me to a Buddhist community in northeastern India, in Assam, where there was a samanera in a little kind of grubby temple near the railroad track in this small town. And the Buddha Rupa was really ugly, and it was made out of cement, and it wasn't at all inspiring. And so is that, do you expect to be inspired by them? If one is an aesthete, where you're dependent upon perfect beauty, then we get intimidated by symbols. We form opinions and views about whether they're good, bad, beautiful, or ugly. But even an ugly Buddha Rupa is still a symbol for awakened awareness. And that's what the emphasis is on in this reflection. Awakened awareness, not on having perfectly good taste in interior decoration or temple adornments and whatnot, because we can get carried away with our own views about what's beautiful and what isn't. But awakened awareness, we're aware of that. If we very, very high standards of aesthetic beauty, where anything that doesn't quite live up to our high standard of beauty is rejected, or we feel averse or contempt for, then if we follow those emotions, we're caught in the cycle of samsara. So we have to live in a life, just trying to bend the situations we're in so it meets our high standards of good taste. And that's not liberation, that's not enlightenment. That's just suffering. Or we can go the opposite direction, say symbols don't really matter at all, you don't need Buddha Rupas. All that, we're above all that. That's still a kind of supercilious snobbery, thinking we know what the Buddha really taught, and our opinion about Buddha Dhamma is the right one, and if you don't agree with me, you're all wrong. But if you tend to that extreme, you can be aware of it, aware of this very kind of superior attitude or your own sense of what's right that you grasp and hold to, and then judge everything else, everyone else by that standard. So I received a question about enlightenment. What is enlightenment? And it's a common enough word in this tradition. We talk about enlightenment. What is it? What do we mean by that? So this is an investigation of the word, so that we're not just defining it according to the Pali, English, Thai dictionaries. We have, we get easily definitions from outer sources. Various people, individuals have various views about enlightenment. In Thailand, some monks, I remember Ajahn talking to some Thai monks from the town who told him that nobody can get enlightened these days because it's not like the time of the Buddha where there were, people becoming enlightened just in the thousands. But nowadays, it's impossible. That's a viewpoint, isn't it, about whether anyone can get enlightened. And questions about, was Ajahn Chah enlightened? What do we mean by that when we wonder about Ajahn Chah being enlightened? Do we expect him to be something extraordinary? And so, but actually, just taking the word itself, light is a symbol, isn't it? It's a reality. It's enlightenment means seeing clearly, if seeing in the light, seeing the way things are for yourself, not just believing what you've been told or what everyone else believes. Sometimes proper monks shouldn't even discuss enlightenment because it's a dodgy subject, But what I'm trying to do now is just to investigate the word, reflect on it for each one of you, just to challenge yourself to observe how you see that word right now. Your own definition. Your own assumptions about it, whatever they might be, whether you believe it's possible, whether you think you're enlightened, or I'm enlightened, or Ajahn Chah's enlightened, or we're not enlightened. These are all thoughts that we create. We grasp thinking. We grasp words, we grasp definitions, we grasp symbols. We grasp our sense of righteousness. There's really nothing more difficult than a righteous monk or nun, because they always have to be right, no matter what. But is right a kind of permanent state of being? Is one, is any human being, living individual, always right? Can we be 100% right as a person, as a senior monk or senior nun? Is that something that is expected or projected onto members of the Sangha? So the enlightenment, then you ask yourself, is there like an enlightened being, enlightened monk, that we assume are enlightened, like in Thailand, there are various Ajahns that we believe are enlightened. And so, is there a kind of permanent enlightened personality that one automatically becomes? Can a personality, anybody's personality, become enlightened? That can something artificial like a personality, sakyaditi or the ego, can that attain enlightenment, or is it just a mental habit? It's a condition, it's a phenomenon. Because when we observe, when we reflect on our own views and opinions, that which is aware of an opinion, aware of a name, aware of an object in consciousness, awareness is non-personal. It's anatta. So the Buddha made this anatta teaching very clear. In Theravada Buddhism, it's very strongly emphasized. The anatta as this becomes a belief, becomes something we believe in because we've read it in the scriptures, and the Buddha's words were about anatta. All Dhamma is not self. So we start investigating what do we mean by the ego, just the English word that's commonly used in psychology, the ego. What is one's ego? We say egotistical, meaning someone's very kind of self-obsessed or self-important. But the ego covers much more ground than just that kind of perception. The ego is an artificial creation that we acquire through our lives. In early life, when a newborn baby doesn't have an ego, it's conscious, it has a human form, can be male or female. But if you ask a newborn baby if it's male or female, it doesn't answer, it doesn't know what you're talking about. So awareness, mindfulness, intuitive awareness, conscious awareness, these are all words that we use, pointing at the reality of here and now before we grasp anything, before we become a person, a personality. And so, when we talk about awareness, being aware of awareness, in Thai, Luang Pu Dun, one of the enlightened Thai masters who died many years ago, his definition of the Third Noble Truth, Jit and Jit. And Jit is consciousness, knows itself. It doesn't know itself as an object because it is itself. And that's the path to when you have that insight, when you realize through investigation for yourself. You're not just believing me or Ajahn or anybody else blindly, but all we can do is encourage and keep pointing in the making you look, encouraging you to look at yourself. So if there's no personality operating in the present moment, there's silence. Is that jit and jit? Is that consciousness knowing itself? These are questions, and there's no answers. So any personality never gets enlightened. So as long as you identify, it's impossible for a sankhara to become enlightened because they're empty phenomena. When you explore, like in the Anatta Sutta, go through that whole sutta about anatta, there's nothing left. There's no self. So it sounds like annihilation, like we're just destroying the world, the conditioned realm. We kind of think it's something we've got to get rid of and destroy. But in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the Buddha made it very clear, it's neither Kama Sukkhale Kanu Yoko, kind of between eternal life as a person, eternity as a belief, as a personality, that if we become enlightened, we will live in Nibbana forever as some kind of soul, some kind of permanent, undying personality. I'll always be Ajahn Sumedho even when I'm dead. So whether, we think of time, eternity in terms of time as something, a condition that lasts forever. So eternity becomes a word that we use for, someone is immortal, eternal, they never die. That person is imagination. No person can be eternal. Just observe your own personality, how changeable it is, how it's so dependent upon whether the sun's shining or it's cold and wet, whether people love you or hate you. Your personality shifts, changes according to so many other conditions. But you're aware of that awareness of how fickle your personality can be, how dependent it is on being liked and praised and successful and wealthy and approved of. To have a positive sense of self, self-love, appreciation for yourself, a positive ego is, much sought after in many circles these days. To love yourself as a person. But we're not expected to love our personalities, our sense of ourselves as a person. We take refuge not in some kind of imagined love for my personality, but in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, which are symbols like any others, they're words, but they're pointing not at any one, single one as an enlightened person. So they're to be reflected upon. So nothing can be more direct than a teaching of wake up here and now, like Buddha. That particular word, Sanskrit Pali word from India, ancient languages, means awake. Awake doesn't mean you're not sleeping. It means you're no longer attached. You've seen for yourself the suffering, the causes of suffering, by being attached to yourself as a person, as being a person who's right, or a person who's good, or a person who's no good, or whatever, however you rate yourself as in terms of good and bad, right and wrong. Whether you love your personality or you don't like it, doesn't matter as long as you're aware that what is personal, this sense of I am this physical form, I am this individual, independent self being sitting here on this seat, as long as I'm attached to that, then there's always suffering. Because attachment, clinging, blindly grasping conditioned phenomena is the cause of suffering. So awaken awareness. You see, you don't just stop grasping when you awaken, but you observe the suffering, how much one suffers when you're grasping a sense of your separateness, of yourself as a personality, of your position in the Sangha, of your position in the society. So grasping sankharas out of ignorance, as long as one grasps sankharas, the result is always going to be suffering, some kind of suffering. It can't be otherwise, because sankharas are terribly disappointing, even at their best, because they don't stay at their best. Sankhara, very nature is impermanence, to change. The law of karma, what is born dies, what begins ends. So there's no enlightened sankharas. So then the question is that all we can be, is just empty phenomena? All of us sitting here dedicated to this path, this way of living, the samana life? Is it just a pointless, empty phenomena that we're indulging in? Some kind of belief system, some kind of religious cult that we've aligned ourselves with? Because there's so much media available about religious cults and belief systems, stories that we assume are always right. Stories we've been told since we were very young children, like what is cultural conditioning? But a story about what your parents believe is, for, say, someone like the American way of life. The stories that are part of a cultural identity, whether you're British, American, Thai, French, doesn't matter. You get different stories, different emphasis, but all they are stories, propaganda. So, like, it's interesting at a time where nationalist movements are popping forth around the world, where people believe that their nation is special, or that one nation has to be preserved, a nationality, national identity has to be preserved. And this is all empty phenomena. It has no essence, no quality to it other than it is. We've been maybe believing in it, never questioning it. Since we just take it on as innocent children, like innocent, as long as you're innocent as a child, you just believe what you're told. So then there's different problems between nations, fighting each other, whether you're French or German, Mexican or American. One time I asked Ajahn whether, because North America includes Mexico and Canada, so I asked him, do you consider yourself American? And he said, no. Because the word American tends to be aligned only with the United States. But there's South America, North America, and it's just a word given to continents that, hundreds of years ago no one knew about except the native cultures that lived there. Is this island that we're living on now called England? Who calls it England? But we do. We say this is England. Does the land that we walk on, that we walk Jongrom, do meditation practice on, that we take walks around, does it say it belongs to anybody? That it belongs only to, is it's an English land? Or is this idea of a separate England from Scotland, from Wales, is this just empty phenomena, proliferation, cultural conditioning? It's projection. We project these concepts onto experience, just like we project a sense of ourself. We create images by believing certain monks are enlightened and other monks are not enlightened. But what is enlightenment? And the reality of it, is it just an empty word that is meaningless? Or is it a directional sign? What is it pointing at? And then we have to look at ourselves. If we're looking for arahants or perfectly enlightened masters through external sources, we might believe in somebody's enlightened, or we might have all kinds of doubts. Somebody tells you that some great master is enlightened, and we believe that. That's a belief. We take it on as a belief. But in the very reality of it, it's just words projected onto a form, or the history or memory of an image. So we're looking at the way things are, rather than how we've been told they are, or assume they are, or believe they are. Stories are artifices, they're not reality. You don't awaken to another story. When you see the suffering, when you realize for yourself the suffering you create through attachment to sankharas, to conditions, to phenomena, you can observe that. Mindfulness, awareness. So it's not something you create. You don't create yourself as a mindful personality. You might believe that you're mindful or believe you're not very mindful, but those are just assumptions you make with words, because you see yourself always with the limitation of your form, of your experience, of your memories. And that binds you to suffering, as long as you never question that, never awaken out of that dream, out of that story. So taking refuge in Dhamma is much more profound than just chanting it in Pali language. It's not just a puja, another empty form that is part of an empty tradition. Because what the Buddha is pointing at is not at forms, not at beliefs. There's nothing to believe in, really, in Dhamma. You don't believe in it because you don't quite know what it is as a phenomenon. Can you point it out? Can you define Dhamma when you take refuge in Dhamma? Is Buddha, is that you're taking refuge in some kind of magical story about the Buddha nature in the universe? You can kind of imagine, the Buddha energy and holds the universe together, or ultimate reality is something or other you can define with various words that nobody understands, really. So it's awaken, wake up, look, observe. This is a gift of our humanity, is that we can do this. It's possible for, the Buddha of the traditional Buddhists, Gautama the Buddha of ancient India, was a living example of a human being who broke through the illusions of his personality, his cultural conditioning, his own language and belief systems of the time. Not by rejecting them or criticizing them, but by seeing that anything that arises ceases. Anything that is born dies. So we have these words, like sankhara, in this tradition we use that a lot. Condition, phenomena. So as long as we, as a person, are trying to become enlightened, we'll only fail at it. No matter how serious you are trying to become an enlightened person, you only fail. So it's not about becoming enlightened, it's about being awake, here and now. So when we talk about enlightenment, there is enlightenment, but enlightenment involves seeing the awakened conscious awareness here and now. So it's not something remote or in the future. It's not about practicing hard so 10 years from now you're enlightened. That's still, Sakya Ditti. So I emphasize the silence as a refuge. Behind the noise of our thinking mind, our emotional habits, even when you're caught up with crazy emotions or beliefs or doubts, underlying that is silence. Because awareness doesn't have a language. There's wisdom. Wisdom doesn't have a language. Languages are all sankharas, but we can use symbols, we can use Buddha-rupas, we can use traditions, and that's up to us. That's the encouragement. It's not about a cult that you have to believe, and if you disbelieve, you're a heretic or you have to leave. But the encouragement is, if you don't believe what I'm saying, at least you can be aware that it's like this. Not believing is a sankhara, can be an emotion, a feeling that you can observe. There's awareness of it. And this awareness isn't judging it. It's not about what you should believe or shouldn't believe anymore, but believing is like this and disbelieving is like this. And when you patiently go through the fetters that bind you to sankharas, as you trust more in your awareness as your refuge, more and more you have a wise understanding, insight into Dhamma. Dhamma is reality here and now. It's not some abstract idea, some metaphysical concept. So what is enlightenment? You can, try to imagine it as some kind of perfect state of bliss is one belief, that enlightened individual is living in a blissful state forevermore. So it's perfection. It's the ultimate. It's being totally free from suffering. But as long as we bind ourselves to sankharas, we're going to suffer. Sometimes we can attain blissful states in this life, where you have really what we call good meditation or good samadhi, where you get really blissed out. And then, if we're not reflective, we tend to attach to memories of previous good experiences in meditation and want them again. So that's desire, isn't it? Bhavadana, wanting something you don't have at this present time. So awareness here and now means that whatever we experience, whether we're absolutely miserable or doubtful or angry or jealous or frightened, blissed out or whatever, the real refuge is the silence that underlies all those states that arise and cease. And this is Bhajatang, this has to be realized individually by each one of us. Because words, anything I say, is still sankharas, proliferating on and on. I remember reading a quote in the Visuddhimagga years ago, I forget exactly where, or even whether it was a Visuddhimagga, but it was a quote saying, there's a path, but nobody's on the path. And I thought, that's depressing, Here, I joined the Sangha to get on the path, and nobody's on it, according to this quote. But then as you investigate, as you begin to realize Dhamma for yourself, you realize that somebody, a person, can't get on the path. So as long as we believe we are the person we believe we are, we never question it. Am I Ajahn Sumedho all the time? So I even ask myself this question. When is there no Ajahn Sumedho? And so, I assume, with a name, a title, and so forth, that I'm permanently Ajahn Sumedho 24/7. That, I'm always the senior monk or whatever, my position in the Sangha I'm very identified with as a person. And is this personality of mine, is there a permanent quality to it that is with me all the time? And so by investigating, by examining suffering and its causes, I began to see that, Ajahn Sumedho is a sankhara, it was a title given to me by someone else, and that the sense of being Ajahn Sumedho arises when somebody says Ajahn Sumedho, or I start thinking I'm Ajahn Sumedho. But other than that, there's no Ajahn Sumedho. There's awareness, consciousness. So investigating the sense of yourself, your personality, is not to say you should love yourself as a person or hate yourself, or you should get rid of your personality. Is to understand personality is a sankhara, it's a given factor, it's an artificial condition, it's empty phenomena. It's not to be despised, but it's not to be loved either or grasped. It is what it is. So I offer this as a reflection for this afternoon.